our planet, spinning quietly in space. Where did it begin? What has happened? Where will it end up? These three questions form the basic three-act structure of every story, where anything and everything can and does happen. Our world is a busy and complex place. Storytelling is occurring all over the planet. It's a phenomenon as old as humanity itself. Stories can connect and unite us, or drive us apart. There is an intricate web of storytelling going on all the time that we take for granted. What do we get out of it? Watching and reading all this invented mayhem and interaction we call escape, diversion, or entertainment, but most of it is simply watching other people do other things. None of it real. We proliferate, create, and invent new stories and new ways of telling them all the time. The purpose and intent of storytelling is something we rarely consider. The world is full of stories in our lives, our homes, and our lounge rooms. For every masterpiece, a million more stories are being imagined, conceived, crafted, written down, or produced. We build stories like we do cities. They are complex structures. Where cities have become much more than a place for shelter and community, they represent our ideals, our beliefs. So too do stories represent our community and our culture. They also reflect our ideals, our beliefs, our vision for our lives. I'm on a mission. I'm searching for answers as I investigate the phenomenon and our reasons for telling stories. I'd like to know what the real story is behind all stories. The beauty and complexity of our world is reflected in our fiction. I'm investigating what it means to tell and create all stories. What goes into creating a story? In this insider's view of story, we look behind the scenes as we meet some of the various makers and creators of stories.
Theatrical practitioners and big thinkers are doing their best to get the general public thinking more deeply and more critically about what's going on.
Behind every brilliant story, there is a mastermind at work.
And so I've decided to throw Captain Arthur Phil his very first coming out party, hooray!
The theatre. The place where some would say it all began. The magical world of the stage, an actor and an audience. The three basic ingredients to baking a good story. There's always a little nervous excitement, perhaps even anxiety when entering the theatre. It's a little like entering a sacred place. Even when what's taking place is a little irreverent and sacrilegious.
I'm not a homosexual!
But then, isn't that what the theatre is here for? Why does the history of Australia need retelling in a theatrical performance?
I think our sunburned history needs to be retold because we weren't taught the correct facts to begin with. It's not necessarily a retelling, but a myth-busting experience. And I think people like to engage with comedy and entertainment more than they do sometimes with book or just straight facts.
What determined you to feel that it needed to be told?
My ignorance. this started from a place of total ignorance. I wasn't fascinated, interested by Australian history. I didn't think it was particularly fun or enjoyable. I didn't think there was anything to be had with Australian history. And then I started researching Burke and Wills back in 2011. And I was fascinated by the reality of the story, the madness of the story, how unbelievable it was that someone gave Burke this much money, responsibility and power, and we laud him as a hero, or at least primary schools teach us that they're heroes, and to find out they were anything but was so interesting and engaging. I thought people would want to know. So I told them, through the miracle of theatre. We have 2 centuries of mystery, journals that are contradictory, so I bring a delivery of our sunburn history. This is our 3rd century, our 300th officially. Don't forget the Aborigine, such a sunburn history. Aussies have religiously warped the facts suspiciously, played with truth creatively, so I give you a sunburn history. We don't change our facts unnecessarily when it comes to our ancestry. I just want the truth set free, and that's our sunburn history. So sit back as I expertly use fact mixed with hilarity. Watch while I fearlessly reveal our sunburn history. There won't be an examination. I don't do audience participation. But if you are in the situation and you can pass on my explanation, please put it in the conversation.
This is the story behind all stories.
We wanted to do about a show called The Failures of Man. That was going to be the overall concept. And then we thought, well, we only have an hour. Sunburn History was going to the Melbourne International Comedy Festival, and we had this show idea, The Failure of Man, and then we saw this other concept, this Burke and Wills concept, and that just morphed into the whole show. During the research into The Failures of Man, found the Burke and Wills story, which we assumed would just be what we learnt in primary school, and then finding so much more and finding out the truth behind the Burke and Wills story inspired the whole rest of the show. Sunburn History's done a whole bunch of different shows. So Sunburn History Burke and Wills, Sunburn History First Fleet, Sunburn History Citizenship, Sunburn History Sea Explorer, Sunburn History Bits and Bobs, Sunburn History Knockallipoli, and a Sunburn History Savages is the least linear. So it was a collection of all different things that I wanted to get out, and sometimes you have hours of content. You have something like the Burke and Wills story, which is dozens of books, hundreds of hours. And we've got 8 hours of different scenes and things like that. We have to go from 8 hours to 1 hour. And what do we keep in? What do we cut? And I think with the Sunburn History Savages, there's so much focus in Australia on the Indigenous people being savages, and we came in and we tamed this land and we took care of it and good job us. And I think we look at the realities of the savagery of the Europeans that came here, and there's no doubt that we definitely were the savages. An optimistic memory. We have to stop referring to Indigenous people as savages or think that we've come in and make things okay now. The fact is we've come in and we've made some terrible decisions and treated people terribly, and we should rethink who the savages are in Australia's history. That's our Sunburn history.
So did you set out to be controversial, or you found that the material itself was controversial and therefore you would be controversial?
I think the latter, again. We discovered, or I found, that the information was too interesting to ignore, and the public, for obvious reason, had only been taught certain parts of our history because those are the better parts. Those are the bits we're proud of, so those are the bits we share. And I think it is controversial to share the darker moments, because even now we have a Prime Minister, we just finished having a Prime Minister that wanted us to focus on the good rather than improving the not so good. So he definitely wanted to focus on being positive and forgetting the negative and focusing on the positive, and I think it's important that we do focus on the negative. So I don't think that is controversial, but it becomes controversial when society doesn't want to hear about it. So it wasn't intentionally controversial, but I think the matter is controversial because of our relationship to it. It's more fun to tell people something that might make them a little bit uncomfortable, because I think that's where theatre wants to sit. It wants to sit in a place that makes us think, That's what theatre's done since ancient Greek times. So theatre's supposed to make you think, supposed to take you beyond the space you're in now, and it's supposed to affect you moving forward. So,
and to bring things out of the dark for the community and put the spotlight on them?
Absolutely.
What about your audience? Did you think about who your audience would be for this?
Our aim was always adults. We wanted people between 18 and 50 to come and see the show and say, oh, okay, I was taught this at school, and isn't this interesting that that's not what I was taught? The aim is not necessarily to pitch to 6 to 15-year-olds because they don't have myths to bust. They don't get the irony or the myth-busting element. They only get the entertaining, interesting elements. Like, oh, but this is what happened. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, this is all new information. And the concept is based around the juxtaposition between what we know and what we think we know and the truth. So it's always an adult audience, but lots of different people get a lot of different stuff out of a Sunburn history. I find that young people love it because it's fascinating, and some older people love it because they know it and they find it funny. So it's all those different things. Oh, I know the truth and look, we're seeing the truth. Or I didn't know the truth and here is the truth. Or I thought this, but it's actually this. We have 2 centuries of mystery, journals that are contradictory, an optimistic memory. That's our Sunburn history. We have hundreds of years of misery, of self-preserving fact trickery, an optimistic memory. That's our Sunburn history. Australians are not interested in our history. It's not fascinating. Not because it's dark, not because it's brutal, not because it's terrible, which it's all those things. I think we pretend we know our history so we can stand up and go, I'm proud of our history. But I don't think we know it because we're not interested. I don't think it is because it's bad or sad. I think it's just because it's boring. But the fact is it's not. It's not boring. It's not boring. Australian history is fascinating. World history is fascinating, but it has been pushed aside. Here is a song listing all the leaders of Australia from 1788 right up to today, and I know you all know them, so please do sing along. Captain Arthur Phillip, Captain John Hunter, Captain Philip Gidley, King, Captain William Bligh, Colonel Lachlan Macquarie, Major General Sir Thomas Brisbane. Double time because you know this one. Edmund Barton, Alfred Deakin, John Watson, George Reed, Alfred Deakin, Andrew Fisher, Alfred Deakin again, Andrew Fisher, Joseph Cook, Andrew Fisher, Billy Hughes, Stanley Bruce, James Scull, and Joseph Lyons, Earl Christmas Page, Robert Menzies, Arthur Faden, John Curtin, Francis Ford, Robert Robinson, Joseph Lyons, Earl Christmas Page, Robert Menzies, Arthur Faden, John Curtin, Francis Holt, John McEwen, John Gorton, William Gough Whitlam, Malcolm Fraser and Bobby Hawke, Paul Keating, Kevin I had to add Malcolm Turnbull in because he's now the Prime Minister. My fascination is my motivation for my obligation to the preservation and restoration of this information. There won't be an examination. I don't do audience participation. But if you are in the situation and you can pass on my explanation, please put it in the conversation. There can be an allegation with the connotation or the implication that in this creative simulation I am mistaken and due to modernisation or interpretation are failing in your edification/education. If it's any consolation, there is no deviation without deliberation and citation. It's a stipulation in my organisation, non-for-profit association, that if I find a publication with a differentiation to my conceptualisation, there will be a proliferation of this clarification in that occasion, but only if the qualification of the documentation has undertaken strict arbitration. You following? Asian? You will not find a generalisation in my presentation. My elucidation comes from the formation of hours of contemplation over a variation in a quotation. But if your preoccupation is my misrepresentation of our country's nationalisation, well, that manifestation needs modification. I believe in the discontinuation and deregulation of the proliferation of the simplification without authentication stories of our country's subjugation, starting with our colonialisation.
Australia history is England history, is France's history, is Germanic history, is Asian history, is African history. So Australia's history is African. Africa, that's where the savages come from.
This is the story behind all stories.
So what is Australia's history? Well, you go back far enough. Australian history is just England's history. In 1788, the English people arrived here, coincidentally, on Australia Day, 26th of January. If you go back far enough, Australia's history becomes English history, and England's history, go back far enough, is actually France's history because of the Norman invasion. So Australian history is English history is France's history. But in France, they didn't pop out of nowhere. You know, Europe was populated by the Germanic people. So Australian history is English people, is French history is Germanic history, and the Germanic people wandered down from Asia. So Australian history is Asian people, they wandered over from Africa. So Australia history is England history is France's history, Germanic history is Asian history is African history. So Australia's history is African. Africa, that's where the savages come from. But this was a very long time ago, and the Earth looked entirely different. Well, not entirely different, you could still tell the difference between it and Saturn, but all the continents were smooshed together, and there were land bridges and savages everywhere. And then one day, some people became not savage anymore, and they started taming wild animals, living with them, nurturing them, loving them, eating them, riding them. And around 50,000 years ago, the Indigenous people of Australia wandered over the land bridge into Australia. Now, around 50,000 years ago, there's also a species of animal living in Australia known as Megafauna, the most awesomely named species in Australia's history. Now, around 50,000 years ago, the Megafauna died out. And also around 50,000 years ago, the Indigenous people of Australia arrived. Now, we don't know whether the Indigenous people arrived and the Megafauna was so used to being left the hell alone and given a chance to bloody live that these fantastic hunters just wiped them out. Or the Megafauna died out on their own and then the Indigenous people arrived. We're not sure if they overlapped, if there was any lapping of any kind, because the fossil records are rocky at best. Now, I like to think that the Indigenous people of Australia arrived after the Megafauna died. Because imagine the alternative. Imagine if the Indigenous people, the very first civilization to colonise by sea, came in from another country and wiped out the existing population just because they wanted to live there. Calm as a bitch. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, first Australians. And imagine the alternative. Imagine if the Indigenous people of Australia had lived alongside this Megafauna and had done what countless of other civilizations had done before. Look what we've done in just 5,000 years with the wolf. From the wolf to the Chihuahua. Or more importantly, from the wolf to the Doberman. Imagine what 50,000 years of intergenerational breeding could have done. We could have gone from wombats to wombeasts, from kangaroos to kangarooiners, from koalas to koala gators. Yes, and these wombeasts of our potential past could have taken on the French, English and Dutch ships that dared come to our shores. But unfortunately, no. That's not our potential history. And in 1788, the English people came in and just took over in the most savage way imaginable. They said it was theirs, and they took it.
When does story become the truth, or is it all just a story, a version of a memory, a reality, a history?
All the work I've done is biased. It's all in my version of what I think happened. Absolutely, that it's my interpretation of our history. And no one can be correct because the work we do is based off primary sources where we read the journals from the people at the time and what they were saying. But the fact is their journals were biased as well. So we read one thing one way and you also have to have a social context as well. So this is certainly just one story. I'm telling my story about Australian history. What's my perspective? How do I look at it? And how does it actually look now that we look back on it? When we can look back and say, hey, look at that, and look at that, and look at that. Did we do the right thing or the wrong thing? So absolutely, it's a story. And this is my version of our sunburnt history.
Do you try or desire to be convincing with that?
Yes. Maybe misleading. Perhaps it is unintentionally misleading because I do say it's all true because everything I talk about is true. All the things that I do on the stage is based in truth. I don't make wild accusations, and if I do, and if it is untrue, I will tell the audience that bit was a lie. Say, that bit wasn't quite true, but it was funny. Wouldn't that be funny if it was true? Or I set up hypotheticals quite clearly. I say, okay, imagine if this had happened, or imagine if that had happened. So I don't think I'm intentionally misleading, but I think I certainly have misled people into believing that is exactly what happened. But that's not my fault. I think we all have to, it is theatre, it is entertainment. But at the very beginning, the intention of A Sunburn History was to be accurate. And I think I do my very best to be accurate. I don't change dates or events. I don't mess with people's names or who was there or who wasn't there. I do everything I can to make sure people know this was the situation, this is what actually happened, and then we play with that idea.
Do you think a byproduct of your piece is to tell us that beware of all stories, they may not be true?
Yeah, definitely. I think we definitely make people work their critical thinking muscles. The whole point is to watch a show like this and go, I didn't know that, or I didn't know that, or I can't believe that actually happened when I've been told something totally different. So watching a piece like this will make you think critically.
Do you count yourself as a storyteller?
Certainly, absolutely. I've never given myself that title before, but once the question was asked, definitely without a doubt. I am purposely, and the writers and the director and I work hard to make sure there is a solid arc and there is a through line, and that each skit or sketch, if you want to call them that, or section of the piece is written with a beginning, middle and end, or some kind of structure. It's not just a mess of different stuff. What it is it's like an essay. I have an introduction, I have 3 or 4 body paragraphs, and I have a conclusion. I make sure I'm supported the whole time, and by the end people have been taken on a journey where their opinions have changed, potentially, or their view of history has changed. I want people to question what they're told. And I think that relates to the stories they hear. Theatrical entertainment is supposed to be a learning curve for all people, whether you're looking at realism or you're looking at epic theatre. They both wanted you to learn something and take something and move and grow from that experience. And I think all theatre aims to do that in some way. Greek theatre did it, commedia dell'arte did it, Elizabethan theatre did it, realism's done it, farce has done it, epic theatre's done it, absurdism has done it. All the practitioners have gone out to do their very best to change people's minds, and theatre is the way to do it. But it is a losing battle. It's a battle that we have been losing since 600 BC. The general public is brought in and, hey, look at this festival and Dionysus, isn't this great? And I'm going to watch a show in masks and these amazing performers doing amazing acrobatics. And oh, they're saying something about how we treat women. Oh, they're saying something about how we should engage with our elders. How many people, of the 14,000 ancient Greeks watching these performances actually reflected on what they saw? And how many of them were just shoving popcorn in their mouths?
Is there a hidden message in that as well, that all these characters are within us?
I think what it does by playing several characters is highlights the fact that this is us. That there is no difference between an English convict from 1788 and me. The only difference is circumstance. And if we were in that situation, how would we behave differently? And we often believe that history is different people and that we are now different. And I think the more we realise that's not the case, the better our society will become.
My name is Coral Druin. I'm a storyteller. I created over 900 hours of Australian television.
To learn more about the program, leave a comment and stay in touch. Connect with our Facebook page.